how temporary measures became permanent. They were introduced with clear end dates, framed as bridges, not destinations. Everyone agreed they would disappear once stability returned. And yet, years later, they were still there, unchallenged, embedded, and quietly unquestioned. To understand how temporary measures became permanent, we need to return to a moment of genuine emergency. Systems were under strain. Time was scarce. Decisions had to be made faster than normal processes allowed. Temporary tools offer relief without commitment. They bought time. And at that moment, time was everything. The first reveal appears in the language itself. Measures were labeled provisional, exceptional, and short-term. That framing lowered resistance. Oversight relaxed because permanence was not assumed. Debate softened because the future was supposed to handle the exit. What mattered was survival now, not structure later. The second beat followed as conditions stabilized, but not enough to feel safe. Removing support felt risky. Keeping it felt cautious. Each extension was justified as the last one. Each delay made removal harder. Temporary measures began shaping expectations. Markets adjusted. Institutions adapted. What was meant to support the system started defining it. What made this transformation invisible was its logic. No single extension created permanence. Permanence emerged from accumulation, from hesitation repeated too many times, from fear of disrupting calm that had been achieved at great cost. The measures did not overstay their welcome forcefully. They were invited to remain. By the time anyone asked when they would end, the answer was no longer technical. It was psychological. The system had learned to live with them. And systems rarely let go of what they believe keeps them safe. As the reveal deepened, permanence began shaping behavior in subtle ways. Institutions built strategies assuming continued support. Risk models adjusted expectations. What once felt like an emergency buffer became part of everyday calculation. Removing it now seemed like introducing risk rather than restoring normality. The conflict emerged when dependence replaced caution. Temporary measures reduced urgency to address structural weaknesses. Why make difficult reforms when stability could be maintained through extension? Short-term relief dulled long-term incentives. The bridge became a comfortable platform, and no one rushed to cross it. The buildup intensified as boundaries blurred further. Measures designed for crisis were applied to minor stress. The threshold for intervention lowered quietly. Emergency tools expanded in scope, not through decision, but through convenience. What worked once was reused again and again until distinction disappeared. Markets adapted quickly. If support was assumed, its absence became the shock. Even small hints of withdrawal triggered anxiety. Normality inverted. Intervention calmed. Restraint unsettled. Temporary measures had become expectations rather than exceptions. Public understanding lagged behind practice. The language of crisis persisted even as crisis faded. People sensed permanence but were told it was temporary. Trust thinned, not because systems failed, but because explanations no longer match experience. The gap between words and reality widened. By now, the paradox was clear. Temporary measures had preserved stability, but at the cost of adaptability. They reduced volatility, yet also reduced urgency. What was once flexibility hardened into dependency. The system was safe, but it was no longer learning. And a system that stops learning eventually mistakes survival for success. The tension peaked when the cost of permanence surfaced all at once. Growth slowed where incentives had flattened. Innovation hesitated in environments shaped by support rather than competition. Temporary measures had stabilized outcomes, but they had also muted signals meant to guide change. The conflict sharpened as policymakers faced an uncomfortable trade-off. Ending measures risked disruption. Maintaining them risked stagnation. Each option carried blame. Each delay felt safer than decision. What had once been a tool for survival now constrained imagination. Policy became reactive, calibrated to avoid withdrawal shock rather than to build momentum. The buildup intensified during periods of calm. With no crisis to justify action, removal felt unnecessary. Yet the longer measures stayed, the more systems depended on them. Markets priced their continuation. Institutions planned around them. Temporary support had reshaped the baseline for which all decisions were made. Critics warned that permanence without mandate eroded legitimacy. Measures introduced without long-term consent now govern long-term outcomes. Oversight designed for short duration weakened over time. Accountability blurred. What was nobody's policy became everybody's reality. Inside institutions, concern grew quietly. Analysts saw misallocation accumulating. Risk migrated rather than disappeared. The safety net, stretched indefinitely, lost elasticity. What protected against sudden collapse increased vulnerability to slow decline. By this stage, the realization was unavoidable. Temporary measures had not failed. They had succeeded too completely. In doing so, they had outlived their purpose. The question was no longer whether they should end. It was how to end them, without revealing how much the system now relied on their presence. The turning point came when policymakers reframed exit as design rather than retreat. Ending temporary measures would never be painless, but allowing them to persist indefinitely carried its own hidden cost. Stability had been purchased with time. That time now demanded purpose. The climax unfolded as clear pathways replaced open-ended extension. Conditions were named, timelines published. Measures were separated by function rather than bundled together. Some ended quietly. Others transitioned into explicit, accountable frameworks. What mattered was not speed, but intention. Temporary would once again mean temporary. The resolution followed unevenly. Markets reacted at first, then adjusted. Volatility rose briefly, then settled. What replaced support was not fragility, but clarity. Knowing when measures would end restored the ability to plan. Risk returned, not as threat, but as signal. The system began relearning how to respond rather than rely. What endured from this episode was a cautionary insight. Temporary tools are powerful precisely because they suspend normal rules. Use sparingly, they save systems. Use indefinitely, they rewrite them without consent. Stability without exit becomes inertia disguised as safety. Europe did not abandon temporary measures. It learned to design their ending. And in doing so, it remembered that survival is not the same as progress, and that stability, to remain stable, must eventually let go. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.